Hello, and welcome back to the Mindset Nebula, where we talk about design, we talk about tech, we talk about pretty much all the things that matter to most people in the SAP world. With us today, we have returning guests, both Sarah and Rob. How's it going, Sarah?
Going well. How are you?
Doing well. How are you, Rob?
Doing very good, thank you. It's beautiful outside.
Yeah, and also a brand new guest we have with us today, Patrick. How's it going, Patrick?
Not too bad. First time, long time.
Yeah, this is gonna be fun. It's gonna be a returning duo here. So, introducing the topic for today, we want to talk to you about the first one on the list, where we talk about design. So today we're going to tackle the topic of remote versus in-person design thinking workshops. So we'll kind of talk through a lot of the good things about both of these areas of doing workshops, the bad, some of the indifferent, some of the structures, and some of the fun. But I think first off, we should probably start with a quick, we'll call it a mindset definition of design thinking. So I'm going to take a very, very quick and overall stab, and I will leave it to our experts, Patrick and Sarah and Rob, to help me fill in our lovely design thinking definition. So design thinking to mindset is really it's a way to structure a workshop for folks to get through designing an application. And that is a very, very loose way of saying we want to connect with people, we want to connect with stakeholders, we want to connect with end users, we want to connect with business sponsors, IT leadership, people that are going to be using a tool set to get through a pain point, to get through a problem. And I'll leave it quickly at that, but Sarah, Patrick, Rob, please jump in and define more there.
Yeah, I would say, just to add to that, I would say our design thinking basically is problem solving. We're looking for a solution. We're working together as a team to figure out how something functions and how could it be improved. What necessarily steps could that be? Whether it's a product, a service design, anything like that, there are a lot of creative ideas flowing. And so it's really a collaborative, very exciting, high energy task where we're working together to come to a new solution.
Yeah, two things I would add to that. Would 100% agree with how we built this up. It's one of the things that's unique about, from a problem solving perspective, about design thinking is it's really geared towards helping you solve the right problem. And a lot of times teams will come together to solve a problem that's kind of been teed up, but there's deliberate steps in the design thinking process to analyze the problem space and make sure that you are hitting the most valuable problems and coming up with solutions for those problems, rather than just assuming that we know exactly what the problem to be solved is. And so I think that's important. The other unique piece, I think, is it's a very human-centered approach, which is right along the lines of how we like to design solutions as well. But really what that means to me is it focuses on the human interactions, the human experience associated with whatever the problem domain is. And so rather than academically reading, stories about a problem, we actually observe people and talk to people about how they feel about the problem. And that leads to a unique perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So, with a lot of that, with a design thinking approach, I think, as we talk about in-person versus remote design thinking workshops, I think, a lot of us would agree up to 18 to 20 months ago, we probably wouldn't be talking about remote design thinking workshops quite as much. I think we'd be talking about how do we create interactions in person, and how we make things fun, and how do we create a social networking aspect of people together in person in a room observing a problem and going through this. That changed a little bit, almost 2 years in, sadly, and we get to have fun conversations like this on how we engage and how we do that in a different sort of setting. And going forward, what does this look like? So one of the things I think the entire group here went to some some SAP courses around design thinking just earlier this year, and it sounded like it wasn't really meant to be a focus of an in-person versus a remote, or here's what we can do for remote. But yeah, maybe Patrick, you wanna start in looking at what was that SAP course really about, or how was that teed up?
Yeah, that was really interesting, and I mean, it just kind of shows how flexible the process can be, and that it wasn't intended to be a remote focused workshop, but that's where we all were. So very easily, it was just kind of here's how we're going to change the prompt, and we were all living that in the moment. So coming up with ideas for that workshop was literally just drawing from, I think, everyone's day-to-day current challenges and experiences, and coming together with groups from all over the place, and just trying to it was kind of a condensed process that we were doing too, because we just had I think a 1 day, couple hours each time, and you could come up with ideas and you could think of new ideas, but you very quickly had to make decisions. And I think that kind of prepared, when you bring it back to the workplace the next couple of weeks or whatever. It was interesting to see just in the workshop where it doesn't make or break us from a business perspective, but like it kind of encourages you to bring that back and keep you moving and not overthink things just because the setting's a little different.
Yeah, that makes sense. And about the content in the course itself, was it a lot around tool sets or different tips and tricks or strategies, or kind of what did they go through?
Well, I guess we all kind of had different groups, and in the group I was in, we were focusing on tools and like the idea of coming up with a new tool that could enable, normally if you're in an in-person workshop, you can hand out sheets of paper or whatever you need to do to sketch things out and write things out. And that was what we focused on, was how can you kind of get everyone on the same level playing field with that, just because everyone has different levels of comfort around drawing, sketching, what have you. And just looking at it from a perspective of I have a creative background, so like the idea of picking up pencil and anything you can draw on is just, it's not foreign to me. But looking at it from some people have not drawn since they were in 5th grade art class, and just trying to give everyone a similar kind of hardware and that's okay, hardware and software approach. It was just very interesting to see everyone had just a very different perspective on like, oh, this would be easiest or this would be the best. And you work with the same people all the time, and you kind of have an idea of like what you think they're going to say in these groups, and it'll be the following week and it'll just be like a very completely different idea coming out of them, just because they had that following or that previous week where in their actual work, where they might have been bringing back some of the stuff we talked about in our camp, and kind of discussing it with their coworkers and maybe trying to implement it into their projects. And just seeing that kind of come out was very interesting. And like I said, the pace was always a little different too.
Yeah,
our group ended up really kind of addressing a challenge of engagement, where you've got these people that you've traditionally held somewhat captive, right? In our design thinking studio, at our app house at Mindset, you have people come there and they don't have a laptop open and various other communication channels in front of them. But in the remote experience, as we all know, because we live it day to day, there's just a barrage of other distractions that are around. And so keeping people's engagement through the topic that you're trying to work on, whether that's either problem identification or brainstorming of solutions, or kind of refining those solutions and storyboarding, all of those activities require someone to be focused with their team. And so when we got to conversations around tooling and process and gamifying the experience, all of the brainstorming was around, well, what kind of cool ways could we tool this so that the design thinking experience can be richer by people's consistent participation, and also getting them excited. I think Sarah used that term earlier. You really want to build a lot of excitement around the process as you're generating these ideas, and that's part of the empathy. It's not even just feeling what they're engaged with, but also building empathy with them for what we're trying to build and do together. So that was pretty interesting. And like you do encourage a lot of outside the box thinking in the ideation and the brainstorming that happens, and we were coming up with certainly some pretty crazy ideas for how you might build this. There's a lot of augmented reality and headsets and cool stuff. You figure like a Google Oculus type of device that you're participating in the workshop, and ways that the instructor can identify your level of engagement with retinal scans and things like that. So it was a fun process, but it was really about how do you maintain that human contact and engagement that is so natural in a physical setting in the virtual world. That's kind of what we landed in.
I think that's super important. Just that engagement level is almost taken for granted in an in-person setting, because one, people are excited just to be there together. They know they're there for a purpose. They can put an out of office on if they had to travel, stuff, easy stuff like that people kind of take for granted over time.
Yeah, I would say, just to add on to what Rob said, my group tackled something very different. Or I would say we tackled a bigger problem than we were anticipating at first, but we were trying to figure out if we could design anything, a crazy cool tool that we could use to actually have a hybrid workshop. So having some people in the room and others on a laptop in their office or at their home or whatever that might be. So that way you could get everyone in the same room at one time. So we were trying to think of some way of like a cool smart board like screen where it would act like Mural and it would still engage people in that way. But I think, to your point, engagement of people from a human connection is somewhat difficult. We all felt that. We all know Zoom fatigue. We all know what it's like to be staring at a computer screen versus actually talking to someone over lunch or something like that. So there's a lot of engagement that happens that is beyond just the design thinking course itself or workshop itself. It's a lot more to all of us as humans too. So I think that's a key point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too. And it sounds like the SAP course was kind of fun, where different groups kind of got to tackle different problem areas of how do we do this going forward, and bringing those ideas back. And it sounds like a really fun experience. I think maybe what we can transition here to a little bit is more of the head-on approach of, all right, what's better in person, what's better remote, and what's terrible about each. I'm trying to think of a great example here. I mean, obviously, I think we've all done a ton of in-person design thinking workshops in our past, and I know at least one of my most favorite things about doing that was not the workshop in general at all, and not the certain phases, but it was literally to see different sides of that customer or that business coming together and meeting each other for the first time. Like, these are people just from different worlds that you're bringing together into the same room. And I think for me, that was probably one of the biggest things between remote and in person, because in a remote setting, yeah, you're bringing those same groups of people together, but are they going to have lunch together, like you said, Sarah? Are they going to chat during a break? Maybe, but it's probably easier for them to go on mute and go make a sandwich and take a break. So yeah, I'd be curious, what is the most favorite thing about an in-person design thinking workshop for each of you?
Well,
me,
I would say, you go ahead,
go
Sarah.
So I would say, for me, especially as a designer, in person is a lot easier to look around and get ideas flowing. And I say that in the sense of when you get to that iteration point where you're actually sketching on a piece of paper, I think there's a lot of nerves to it. Similar to what Patrick said, some people haven't drawn or actually sketched on a piece of paper since 5th grade art class. So how do you break that barrier? How do you build up that confidence? And it's a lot easier to do that when you're in a room and you can look around and be like, oh, that person has a stick figure. Like, I can do this. Like, I just have to draw something. Whereas if you're sitting at home in your office and you're like, I don't know, I can write out words, like, yeah, that's helpful, but let's build that confidence. Let's work together. We're all kind of in the same place. And so I think you definitely feed off of each other in person, which is a huge piece.
Yeah, I agree with that. The energy is hard to replace. You know, the words that get written on a sticky and put on a virtual, you know, in a mural board, it's the same words that you might put on a true physical Post-it note and put on there. But the actual energy of building off of that and feeding off of that, and the physical prompts that you get, the body language and the excitement that you can kind of build, that's not something you can replicate on the video very easily at all. Similarly, if somebody's disengaged, it's really hard to probably recognize that as easily and maybe pull them in and provide some of the physical cues to attract that person into the conversation. So I think that part to me is clearly the piece that's the most challenging of having that virtual experience.
I would kind of, you know, mirror what both of them said too. I know when we've been doing virtual workshops and no one has their camera on, it's like you're talking to, you know, empty space. But at least with video, if we can get everyone to have video on, you can kind of read facial cues and go off that a little bit, and that can, I think, sometimes in turn help them loosen up because they can see you can see them, and you don't feel like you're just talking to, you know, disembodied voice. But yeah, if you can't get everyone to, you know, have the camera on, it gets kind of tough to get everyone kind of on the same energy level and engaged.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think there's a lot more recognition in who is and who isn't engaged when you're in a remote session. You know,
and I haven't actually participated in a physical session for quite a while, but you know, one of the benefits that I would presume is pretty prevalent if you have a session like in our app house, for example, is there's when you're doing that prototyping and creating, you know, high or you know, kind of low res details, the things that you have to work with, like Legos and you know, construction paper and scissors, and the things that are available to have a broader set of models that you build rather than everybody just drawing something, would lend itself to a lot more creativity and kind of outside the box thinking, I would presume. And so your tool set for that, even just that component of it, feels pretty limited in the online version. Yeah,
that's for sure. I know at least one thing I used to do in person workshops was you know, kind of invite anybody in the room, like, I'm just up here on a whiteboard, you know, if you have a great idea, please come and steal the marker from me, right? Please come draw a box. It's not that hard, I promise. You know, even though fifth grade was a long time ago, but that's something that you know, some tools, you know, some remote tools are really good at as well. Like, you can go off and start drawing things in a little side of the paper and show them to people, and maybe that's something we can talk about here is, you know, what are some of our tools, and how do we use the tools in a remote design thinking workshop to try to best mirror that engagement that you would get from in person.
Yeah, I would say, just circling off of that, I would say there are definitely pros to remote workshops, and having tools like we use Mural, and I know SAP used Mural for our design thinking workshop. There are plenty of other tools like that out there. Like FigJam is new this year. Miro is new. I mean, is used there are a lot of great tools where you can collaborate, bring people together on one place. And I would say that's a pro of having a remote workshop is all of your notes, all of your documentation, all your sticky notes are there. They're put on this giant mural whiteboard, which is awesome. And everyone can go back and look at it even months, years later. Like, it's still there. We can still think about, why did we say that? Why did we choose that? Oh yeah, that's right. We walked through this whole process. We got to this conclusion. So it's a helpful reference point versus having something on a dry erase board. But at the same time, they are cool tools to really engage people in a remote setting.
Yeah, so from the interpersonal standpoint too, we oftentimes use Zoom. Some people use Teams and WebEx, and there's a variety of options out there, but they all have at least the ability to have a video presence face to face. But the other piece of that, I think that's similar to what Sarah just pointed out, is you can record a session and then save that, and then kind of the conversation and the things that were discussed and decided upon, and the interaction can be kind of memorialized as a record of the event. And that's another pretty easy piece to enable out of it. So there's a benefit there.
I would agree that, like, especially if you're getting a lot of good engagement, it can be really easy to miss the occasional detail here and there that might in the moment seem like, oh, that's good, but you're working on something further down the road and you go back and you realize, like, oh, that's like actually a really crucial piece of information that in the moment you just you recognized and kind of moved on. But having everything, whether it's a recording or like a master file that a really well filled out mural ends up being, can be just a huge resource when you're further down the road. So like I'd say that's, if there's going to be an advantage that a remote workshop would have, it's because it's that almost everything about it is recorded somehow.
Yeah. So another plus of remote sessions is not everyone can travel at the same time. And when in person, if you're all trying to meet up at a certain place, there's people that could be missed in that process. With a lot of the remote sessions, and of course, a lot of the people we work with are very globalized customers. Getting that better feedback from a broader audience in different locations. I think a specific example I'm thinking about is a lot of supply chains. A lot of supply chains have warehouses all over the world. They don't automatically all operate 100% the same, depending on localization and restrictions. And when you're putting something like a global template or a global application together, you want to make sure you're hitting as many of those as possible right up front, get all the pain points, just so that as you go through, farther down the road, once an application build starts, you're not finally just learning about some localization requirements of a very specific scenario. It came up at the time. So I always thought that was kind of cool to be able to make sure and include as many of those the right folks as possible.
And along those same lines, you can definitely bring together more teams that, like you said, that maybe don't get a chance to connect every day. So it does lead into the fact that you can have that collaboration more than just your own team.
Yeah, and to the recording point, taking that recording, taking that mural to all of the different teams within the company also helps, just because it's there. If they weren't able to be in the design thinking workshop, that's fine. We can walk you through some of the outcomes, get your feedback. I think a lot of the ways we used to do that with the in-person sessions was really just with the high-res prototype. So they didn't get a lot of the build-up into, here's what we came out with. But now, via something like Mural, you can walk them through that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's interesting when just when you think about how people's expectations are shifting, and how the kind of the interaction of business is going to be in the future, but even as we kind of step further away from the heart of the pandemic, it feels like there will need to be some hybrid participation in almost all of these sessions. The timing when we could expect everybody to come in person feels like that might be a pretty unique circumstance going forward, and be interested in your perspectives on that. So, Sarah, the work that your team was doing in that session that we had with SAP, how you figure out that hybrid product approach towards conducting these design thinkings, I think that's kind of spot on to what we need to figure out. How do you enable the best of what you can with each of those to some degree, because it's going to be kind of forced upon us. Not every participant is going to be there. I think there's benefits in that, and that's not something that we really had to figure out previously, because culturally it was probably more acceptable to say, no, you have to be there to do it. Or it was more the exception to the rule. And so there wasn't as much attention paid to how do we make that experience valuable for the people who are remote in it, as well as the people who are in the room. But it feels like that's kind of where we're going to be in, I don't know, in short order if you look at everything else.
Yeah, to me, I think that's the hardest thing coming out of this, and where we kind of start to hypothesize on how exactly does, having, let's say, 8 people in person and 6 people remote, what's the interplay between that? How do we control that? And I think, that's maybe something, how do the individual roles get affected here in some of this stuff? So I think that's a lot of the, I'd say just from the remote sessions I've been a part of, I think there's a lot of work that comes to the facilitation to make sure people are engaged. But there's a lot of other roles at play here, right? So, hybrid of the future, does that change facilitation a ton? What happens to those different people that are engaged here?
Yeah, it's a great question of how do you look at, quote unquote, the personas that we have, that all the people who would be a part of a remote or an in-person design thinking workshop or a hybrid. How does that all come into play, and what does that mean? And I'd say there probably would be the need to have your teams reorganize, whether it's the client, the customer, the guest, whoever you're working with, and your own internal team who's facilitating that design thinking workshop. You might need someone facilitating in person, but you might need someone troubleshooting technology issues that people might be having who are hybrid. As much as we say, like, I'm proficient at Zoom now because I've done it for every day for the past 2 years. That's great, but my internet goes out still. So you can't always predict everything that's going to happen, but also how do you make sure those people are engaged and can actually voice their own concerns, pain points, whatever it is that you're working through is a key topic. So you might need multiple facilitators just to fill one role, and how do you keep that moving forward? But at the same time, a lot of prep goes into it too. So like prepping an in-person workshop might be, I got to print off all these things. I got to have all these sticky notes. I got to have pens that work. I can't have a pen that doesn't work, things like that. But then you also have to have someone making sure everyone who can see what's on the dry erase board is also something you can see on a mural. And how do you build an in-person workshop that isn't everyone on their laptop all together? Because then you lose that engagement. And so I think there's a lot more questions there than answers. But if you were to break open that persona, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, does that change for? Oh yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I would just say, if you even think about the interactions that happen within a workshop, there's people that are writing things, and you're either writing, if you have people writing some things on a virtual whiteboard and a virtual sticky and mural, and other people writing on physical sticky, and then you want to organize those because it's a big function of what you do. You've got the convergent thinking of everybody taking what they've all put onto the board and grouping them into categories and making themes and voting on those, and having people in 2 different worlds presents a pretty unique dilemma of how you bring that together. And so we probably have to be really creative around how are you taking what's virtual maybe and transcribing it to something physical, or vice versa. The physical sticky notes, maybe you have a team of people that are digitizing those, if you will, and getting them into the mural board so everybody can work together and, I don't know, take some advantage of that. It is a unique dilemma.
And does it change, all of the different people that we have as, the roles out there? And obviously it changes a ton for attendees. The facilitation changes. But when we look at stakeholders, does it really change too much of the output or the outcome that the stakeholder is part of, or how does their role change in this?
I think it depends. I would say, it depends on if the stakeholder is in person or remote. I think being an attendee or being someone who is actually participating in a workshop is different. If I have my dog running around and I am getting a whole bunch of messages on Slack and I'm supposed to be paying attention right now, I have a lot going on. And granted, we want people to come and actually have that dedicated creative time, but can you force that? It's the same thing of everyone's been working remote. You have to balance that too. So I think it can be similar, but it's also, there are some pain points of how do you make sure people are engaged in that process too? You want that buy-in, you want that adoption and the real excitement behind what solution you're creating.
Yeah. So a question to each of us for the group. So how could, let's say we've been doing fully remote design thinkings for quite a while now. If we could move back to being 100% in person, what is one thing each of you would bring back to that in-person session that we only basically use because of being remote?
You mean take one thing that happens remote that you would introduce to the in-person?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a hard one for
bring
me.
even like a fraction of the ability to have like a master file like we do in Mural in an in-person. I would absolutely love that, because like I do my best to take notes, but Sarah knows, I've talked to her about it. Like I have a very questionable memory at times. So like I will be fully engaged with people talking about, issues, problems, and solutions, but if I don't immediately write it down, there's 50-50 chance I might not remember it as clearly as I'd like. So I personally love having Mural the ability to just go back, over the course of, however many weeks we'll do workshops with people. I sometimes will just never close it because I need it to just be right there. I like having it, first thing I see when I log into my computer in the morning, and just kind of remind me like, what did we cover yesterday? What's the plan for today? So yeah, I know that's the biggest thing I would bring from the remote experience to an in-person, is just any way of recording. Even if it's just taking pictures of the board at the end of the day and trying to figure out a way to, get that into like an editable format of some sort or something like that. Just having maybe just a day where each day as a section of like a Mural board where you can go back and see everything. I think that would be my number one.
Yeah, agreed. Sarah, Rob?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. Another unique thing that I saw that we did, because this class that we had was distributed across the world too. It wasn't just that we were virtual, but we were all in different time zones. And most of the people were actually, I think, in Europe, but there were several in North America and Canada and the US. The online piece of it enabled us to all kind of work on some of the exercises in our own time zones, if you will, right? So there was always a component of the work that we did together within a session that was coordinated, but then we would have homework, if you will, right, where we'd have to go and spend some time creating high-res prototypes or drawing storyboards and putting together thoughts on prototyping. And we'd get together in smaller groups, and you could do that work independently and have the same recorded output, but also do it outside of just that window of time which I guess, kind of broadened the duration over which you can provide content into that. I thought that was really useful. So that's another component that would be good to bring back if you were able to have that mural-ish type of content curation, that there's work that can be broadened outside of what was traditionally just, the design thinking session.
I would agree with what both of you had said. Those were things that came to my mind of, if we could record or have all of the documentation just accessible for everyone to look at. Some people digest this massive amount of information that we all are looking through in a different way. Sometimes they need to sit on it for a little bit just to say like, oh yeah, okay, this makes sense. Now, what about this piece that we forgot? It's helpful to have that time. So I would say that's really helpful to have at least like a master data set for us to look at, whether it's a mural board or whatnot. But I would also say it's really helpful for us as designers who are helping to build that product too. So we go back through that and we look at it, but we also ask a lot of questions. And so I would say we have a lot more of those chats and conversations that maybe are offline. And I would say that would continue too. So making sure we do that in person too, but making sure we're making those connections more one-on-one too, because that helps to build that relationship and helps to build that engagement with our stakeholders.
Yeah, I think those are all good ones. I was trying to think of something different to say while you all said said the normal one. I think for me, it's a little bit like if we were going to go back to full in person, let's say it's not hybrid at the moment. I would say a lot of the planning of time and the agenda around how remote DTWs have been conducted, like a lot of what you all said, and we have this very structured workshop time where everybody's together, everybody's sharing thoughts and things, but we also have outside time that we can either, for stakeholders, they probably have 6 other calls that they probably should be on. For attendees, there's emails to check up on. So having a very structured kind of off time to say, okay, this hour or 2 hours in the in-person workshop is completely devoted to your time. That might bring people back into a more engaged space once they get back to the session itself and say, okay, these 5 big things are taken care of. Let's come back and really focus on what we're here for. Same
breaking
thing
it
for
up
remote.
a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's something that's actually we talked about in the sessions that was really important for remote participants, is to avoid the Zoom fatigue and to enable them to feel like they can turn off their distractions by segmenting the sessions a little bit more and making sure that you're not overloading a particular session and seeing their energy wane and their engagement wane and starting to accept more of those distractions. I think that was one of the important outcomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, as we kind of get through the topic here, what do we think for the future? So, do we think people will go back to 100% in-person sessions? Do we think it absolutely has to be hybrid? And how best to do that? Would love your thoughts on that one.
I think it's going to be, what was their experience with the remote workshops they did? So like if they were with, a company or, whoever that was facilitating a really, engaging, everyone felt like, their voice was heard type of workshop, I think they'll be, as a client, a lot more open to either another remote or a hybrid. We're going to send, these 5 people and then these 10 people back at, headquarters will log in because, hey, this worked fine when we were all at home. I think as long as, they didn't have a complete, disaster remote experience, and that could even be coming from their own internal, communications, not even from a workshop. I think people will be more open to it. I think there's probably going to be a subset of people that want to go. I know I was reading about, the 2008 recession and how business travel all took a hit. And then once things were looking up, business travel came back huge because people were just like, they were so used to going to, XYZ other office or, other supplier, other vendor, other client, that they really wanted to see people in person. And like, that's just what worked best for them. But I also think there are people that they're going to grow to prefer this kind of communication and interaction, and they'll say like, hey, I'm all for participating, but I would prefer the remote one because they might be outside influences that they just don't want to leave town for 3 days. And if it means that they're also getting more people involved on their end as like a client, I think it could be overall better. We might get more broad input that could result in a lot better solution. So I think moving forward, I don't know how far in the future, but I think for a little while we're still going to be doing either fully remote or hybrid. And I again, as long as the people putting it on know what they're doing, like us, I think it'll be good. I could be wrong though. So
yeah, I don't foresee that. I mean, I just think hybrid is going to be kind of a minimal requirement for just to get the broader participation, what people are used to. I do hope though that more people remember the value of being together, and that's incumbent on us too, is providing that experience to really help people appreciate the value of getting together in person, because the experience of coming down to our app house and doing this with our facilitator and having the team building that kind of surrounds it all, and the ability to participate in a happy hour afterwards and kind of enjoy the entire process from a more human perspective, I think adds a lot to the excitement that people feel about the outcomes and I guess the skin in the game that they have to help bring those outcomes to fruition. So I think that the results will be better the more that people engage in that part, and it'll probably be up to us and the sponsors of these programs to encourage that and help people to remember the value of that. But I'm with Patrick in that there still is so much involved in the kind of setting people into their hybrid space that I think that's going to be a reality for most of these sessions that we do.
I would agree. I would say looking in the future, yes, we're going to get back to, there will be in-person design thinking workshops. There will be remote design thinking workshops. And I think there's that value of having a hybrid. And I think you can kind of balance the both of, if you have an in-person workshop, but you really need to hear from this warehouse on the other side of the world, that can happen. And you can do, like Rob said, segment it. You can make sure you plan time where that person would be overlapping with an in-person workshop or whatever it might be. You can work with those necessary ideas to make something happen. So I would say, I think there's a lot of value and there's a lot of excitement that comes from it. And if we can continue to facilitate that, then it's going to happen. But design thinking workshops are not going to stop all of a sudden. We're going to keep moving forward, and we're going to keep iterating as we always do to make it as best and enjoyable of an experience as possible. So that way people are excited about what they are walking away with and the experience that they had to get there.
Yeah, I think maybe not to sound salesy or anything, but in a in-person design thinking workshop, you're not only creating a solution, you're selling an experience, like you were getting at, Rob. Like, this is a collective experience that this group went to together to come out with something that solves a problem, solves a pain point. The number of times we've heard that from people that say, and as soon as I went through this, I went back and said to my team, wow, I was part of creating this solution, and I can't wait for you guys to see it, or I can't wait for this to be built so that we can use it. And granted, that happens in remote design thinkings as well. Not to think that outputs are any different from a solution or pain point standpoint. It's just that once you kind of come together into a place like the App House, where you can touch and feel and do different things together as breakout groups and laugh about it and everything else, it's you come away with that memory. And that's the biggest thing I couldn't really put my finger on if that happens as much in the remote world or not. I mean, in my mind, hybrid has to be in the future. It needs a lot of structure, I think, and it might even need new tech too, as we come on board. So maybe the last question before we wrap up here is around, if you were to put your ideation hat on and maybe not in sketching but in words, think of what is one thing that future design thinking workshop would be could add in the future. I'm thinking Rob
Sarah,
has a leg up here.
How's that mirror coming along that you guys were designing? Yeah. We're almost done with our Oculus interface.
That was definitely going to be mine, like the HoloLens / Oculus view of, we can all be at the whiteboard together with our with our goggles on.
Well, I mean, similar is, I think as we were talking a little bit earlier, if there is a way to have an interactive whiteboard that is simultaneously being broadcast, and people could put their sticky note on there just as I put my sticky note on there, and they somehow merge together in the virtual world and in the physical world. I think that would bring some of this, bridge the interaction so that feels more, that provides more of the in-person feel, but then it records everything, which, as Patrick alluded to, provides a better output that can be used going forward. I think that's one tech that could maybe, help that hybrid scenario become more exciting and productive.
I would agree with that. That was mostly what my team worked on too. So I feel like that's a lot of what's on my mind. But I would say, to one of our first points of, we can record Zoom meetings, we can record Teams meetings and always go back to them. Recording in-person meetings is a challenge. And so I wonder if there would be a way where you could actually do something like that, but then maybe add notes or document at a certain timestamp when you want to circle back to, like, this is something that I would like to go back to this sticky note at this time. So having some sort of way to capture all the information that is said would be a really great great tool to move us forward to.
I don't think I can think of anything beyond what those two said. That's.
Can you draw a picture, or you some maybe?
I can draw a picture. I can draw pictures all day for you. Yeah. If I think of a new idea, I'll come back and I'll share it then. But I can't imagine much else than that.
I think the only other thing I was thinking about was, what is a better way to get everybody involved in observation? We used to go to plant sites or do tours or things like that in a very, kind of 2 or 3 person team that would go observe the process that we're going to talk about in design thinking. Can you attach a GoPro to that person as they go through their day in the life scenario? And I'm sure they would love that too. But can you do that so everybody can kind of come together and observe those pain points together and kind of live that day in the life, so you're all feeling that empathy and that pain coming through design.
For outdoor sessions, you could certainly think about drones as a companion to kind of give you that view as people are going about their work, but probably a little dangerous in a factory setting to have the drone flying around.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. I think we tackled it, guys. yeah, any other additions to what we think about the hybrid future of design thinking here?
It's always evolving.
Yeah, we'll have to have the DoorDash coupons or something to enable the happy hour to more be more inclusive of the people who are remote. Or
Like,
maybe that's just the incentive to get there, right?
Just
To get them as happy hour.
don't tell people why you're asking for their home addresses, and just
Right.
randomly send them a box of open this now. Yeah. Well, cool. As always, this has been a great conversation. Sarah, Rob, Patrick, thank you so much for joining the Mindset Nebula today. And obviously, stay tuned for many more episodes of the Mindset Nebula. If you have ideas or topics that you'd like us to talk about, if you want to join us on a podcast, reach out anytime. We're here and open. So thanks again, everyone, and we will chat again soon. Alrighty. Bye.
Bye.